Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something huge, really spanning a couple of centuries here. We're looking at these individuals who've amassed just staggering amounts of wealth and power.
Yeah, both the historical figures and the modern one.
Exactly, and we're asking, what happens when one person's fortune gets so big it starts to reshape society itself?
Yeah.
We're digging through sources on, the ruthlessness of Carnegie and Rockefeller, the almost explosive ambition of people like Musk and Bezos today.
And the, let's say, complex political machinery they sometimes build around themselves, the funding networks.
Right. It's a critical question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because when a fortune hits a certain point, whether you measure it in railroads back then or, data centers now.
It stops being just money. It really does. It becomes this kind of parallel power structure. And these huge fortunes, they inevitably challenge the existing ways of doing things, governance, commerce, you name it.
Yeah.
So today we're really focusing on what seems to be the real currency for these titans. It's not just the dollars, it's the control they demand.
The political clout.
The political influence, absolutely. And, the incredible lengths they'll go to protect what they've built, their legacy, their control.
Okay, so our mission, basically, is to unpack all that. The specific systems, the strategies, sometimes the, let's be honest, the scandalous bits behind how these fortunes get built up, how they're used, and how they're defended. Really fiercely guarded.
Yeah, we want to understand, what did it actually look like when capital had the state firmly on its side back in the 19th century?
And contrast that with today. What does it look like when maybe one person's ego, their sheer ambition, dictates the entire culture, the direction of a massive global company?
That's the core of it.
All right, let's jump in. Let's start with those original titans and the often pretty brutal ways they accumulated that wealth.
Right. So when we look at those defining figures of the first Gilded Age accumulating wealth, it wasn't usually just about having a brilliant invention or, perfect market timing.
It was more fundamental.
Fundamentally, yeah. It was about financial muscle, knowing where the leverage points were. And this is critical, having political help when that muscle maybe wasn't quite enough on its own. Andrew Carnegie is just a perfect case study here.
Absolutely. And the sources, they give us this really fascinating window into how his wealth started. It shows how much that early success depended on, connections. Yeah. Strategic connections, not just the steel business later on. We see this note from 1863. Carnegie actually listed out all his assets, his investments. It totaled, around $47,860.
Which sounds like a lot, but adjust that for today.
Yeah, it's nearly $8.5 million in today's money. But like you said, where that money came from, that's the real story.
Exactly. Look at the breakdown in the source. 50%. Half of that income came directly from investments in companies holding massive contracts with the Pennsylvania Railroad.
So not just owning some shares.
No. This was deep financial entanglement with state-backed infrastructure. It shows the foundation of his enormous wealth was laid right there, through government-linked contracts, leveraging those connections, basically getting rich because you knew the right people in the right, very powerful places, long before he was the Steel King.
And that kind of rapid accumulation, it often brings up the question of philanthropy, right? The giving back. Yeah. There's this common idea that these tycoons only started giving money away at the end, to clean up their image.
Right, the sort of legacy polishing move.
Yeah. But the sources, they actually challenge that view, at least for Carnegie.
They really do. It's a key point. Carnegie started giving away pretty significant amounts of money much earlier than people think. By the time he was 40, this was long before he sold Carnegie Steel and retired.
So he was thinking about distribution early on.
It suggests that, an early active awareness that his role might eventually be distributing wealth, not just piling it up, which is interesting when you compare him to, say, John D. Rockefeller Sr.
Rockefeller. The ultimate monopolist in many ways.
Right. But even he, despite that image, apparently saw philanthropy as, and this is a quote, a religious duty right from the start, famously gave away, 6% of his very first paycheck.
Wow. Okay.
So you have these two giants of accumulation, but their starting philosophy on giving back, it differed. In timing, maybe in motivation too.
But, okay, regardless of when the philanthropy started, the way they got the money often involved, ruthlessness, especially towards labor. And the sources seem clear that ruthlessness worked because it had backing, institutional power behind it. Can you talk about that Duquesne strike example?
Oh, the Duquesne strike is absolutely essential for understanding the power dynamic back then. Frick, Carnegie's partner, and Carnegie himself, they had spent years carefully building these close ties with the Republican officials in Allegheny County.
Not just casual connections.
No, the source calls them indispensable ties, essential for making sure that any labor actions just failed. So when the strike happened at Duquesne, the state machinery, it didn't step in to mediate or find a middle ground. It was deployed immediately to crush the workers.
So it wasn't just that the government sort of preferred the company's side. They actively acted as the company's muscle.
Precisely. That's exactly it. Frick could break that strike because he knew the system would back him up, reliably. The source quotes his frankly chilling comment that the company just had to whistle.
Whistle.
Yeah, just whistle. And the sheriff's deputies came riding to the rescue. And that just confirms it, right? For labor, the devastating truth was, as the source puts it, capital had the state on its side.
Wow.
And this wasn't abstract political support. This was physical, legal. It was a guarantee that state resources, sheriffs, the courts, eventually even federal troops, if needed, they would protect capital first and foremost. And that guarantee, that's what allowed these huge businesses to expand almost without limits.
That structural advantage, having the state in your corner, it contrasts interestingly with Rockefeller's main strategy, which seems more focused on just overwhelming financial power. What do the sources say about how he approached sort of financial combat?
Rockefeller really understood that cash liquidity was a weapon, always. He always moved into battle backed by abundant cash. Just a deep war chest his competitors couldn't hope to match.
He could just outspend anyone.
He could outbid them, he could outlast them. This financial readiness meant he won tons of bidding contests simply because his reserves were deeper. And he could get cash fast, like incredibly short notice. There's that story about him driving bank to bank just to make sure he could grab a refinery he needed, like within the hour.
Why?
He wasn't just rich, he was strategically liquid. Cash was deployable instantly.
So cash wasn't just profit on the books, it was like a strategic military reserve.
Okay.
But the sources also suggest he wasn't always using brute force, right? Especially early on. He preferred a quieter method sometimes.
Absolutely. Initially, his emphasis was more on patience, calculation. Standard Oil's growth early on was often less about just stamping out rivals and more about, the source uses the word seducing competitors into cooperating.
Seducing? That's an interesting word choice for business.
It is, but it captures something. He often valued keeping the original management in place, bringing them under the Standard Oil umbrella, even if that meant sometimes acquiring what the source calls expensive deadwood on the payroll.
Just to keep things smooth.
Yeah, all for the sake of internal harmony, reducing market friction. He'd wait for the right moment, try reason, offer incentives, before bringing out the big financial guns.
Which makes the eventual public backlash against him even more striking. Because for a long time, it sounds like people didn't really grasp the full scale of what he was doing or how systematic it was. When did that perception change? What brought it all out into the open?
The shift happened relatively late, actually. And the big catalyst was a legislative investigation, the Hepburn hearings. These were New York State hearings in the 1870s. They were mainly looking into abuses by the railroads, things like unfair pricing, discrimination against certain shippers.
So they weren't even initially focused on Standard Oil?
Not primarily, no. But when Rockefeller was called to testify and his dealings with the railroads were put on the record, documented, well, the true mechanism of Standard Oil's power suddenly became very public and impossible to ignore.
So the railroad investigation accidentally blew the lid off the oil monopoly's secrets.
Pretty much. The sources explain how the hearings documented these specific, often hidden deals he had. It wasn't just slightly better shipping rates. In many cases, he was getting rebates on his own shipments.
Okay.
Plus a cut of the higher rates his competitors were forced to pay.
Whoa. So the railroads were essentially paying him to ship his oil and taxing his rivals for him.
That's basically what it amounted to. The public suddenly realized his success wasn't just about being efficient. It was built on this, quote, strange, unsavory bargain with the rail companies. The system itself, the infrastructure, was rigged against his competitors. And that revelation, that's what really fueled the public outrage and the perception that his wealth was, tainted by systemic manipulation.
That link keeps coming up: wealth, infrastructure, political or corporate deals. And speaking of just raw power, Cornelius Vanderbilt, he seems like the embodiment of sheer force. The sources use a really potent analogy for his kind of accumulation.
Yeah, they describe wealth itself acting almost like physics, like mass. It says wealth exerts a gravitational pull, attracting power, social recognition, and more wealth.
So it becomes self-perpetuating.
Exactly. Every bit more you accumulate strengthens that pull. It makes it easier for the Titan to just command compliance just through their sheer size and their track record of winning. Vanderbilt absolutely embodied that.
And he wasn't subtle about using that power, was he? He deployed it very directly, almost brutally. That's maybe what separates him from Rockefeller's more calculated approach. That anecdote about the blockade really stands out.
Oh, definitely. That wasn't just financial maneuvering. That was high-stakes psychological warfare designed to break the opposition's will. Vanderbilt used a blockade, literally holding up vital shipping to force his competitors to compromise.
And it worked.
The sources detail how it drove one specific director, a guy named Keep, into a complete panic. Just absolute panic, so much so that he felt compelled to compromise, basically handing over the power to settle the whole thing to others. Vanderbilt used his established power, his gravitational mass, to create intense fear and paralyze his rivals. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a master of demanding submission.
Right. So these historical figures, whether these state power, huge cash reserves, or just brute force intimidation, they kind of set the template, didn't they? Control the supply lines, control the political sphere, accumulate without friction. But now, when we shift to the modern era, the control seems to turn inward a bit more. The next generation of titans, they apply that same intense desire for control, but maybe more directly to their own companies, their corporate culture, creating this sort of new authoritarianism.
The shift is really noticeable. Yeah, these modern titans, you mentioned Bezos, Musk, maybe Adam Newman at WeWork, they don't necessarily need to own all the physical railroads anymore, but they absolutely seek to control the future of commerce or space travel or how we work together.
Right.
And that pursuit of immense power, it gets channeled through these incredibly personalized, personality-driven management styles. This is where you really see that idea of corporate authoritarianism take shape. The founder's vision, their will, it becomes absolute. It overrides consensus. Sometimes it seems to override reality itself.
Okay, let's start with Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, the Unstore. His public image is usually pretty smooth, calculated. But the sources, they paint a different picture inside the company. They talk about these melodramatic temper tantrums they called nutters.
In the nutters. Yeah, they're fascinating because they really show the intensity of the control he demanded. These outbursts, apparently, would happen if an employee showed what he saw as weakness or, frailty. Or if they tried to bluff an answer, pretend they knew something they didn't.
Or took credit for someone else's work.
Exactly, that too. And the sources say these incidents were just devastating rebukes. This was management by, personal intimidation. His incredibly high standards weren't just in a manual somewhere. They were enforced through direct psychological pressure. It sent a very clear signal. Inside Amazon, the founder's vision, his relentless drive for flawless execution that trumped everything else. Conventional HR niceties, maybe even basic civility sometimes.
And that intense drive, it wasn't just about how he managed people internally, right? It was about disrupting entire industries. That vision of Amazon as the Unstore, it required making some really bold, even financially risky bets to reshape how markets worked.
The ebook pricing is the perfect example of that. Bezos made what the source calls a gut call. He decided to price popular ebooks at $9.95. Now, the crucial part is, the sources emphasize he knew Amazon would lose money on every single one of those sales, at least initially.
Why? Because they were paying the publishers more.
Yeah, often they were paying the same wholesale price for the digital copy as they would for a physical hardcover book. It made no economic sense in the short term.
So why do it? Why take that massive guaranteed loss on every sale?
Yeah.
What was the long game?
It was an incredibly aggressive investment in market dominance. Predatory pricing, essentially. Bezos figured that by setting the consumer's expectation for what a digital book should cost at $9.99...
train the customer.
Exactly. Train the customer, create the market norm. He believed that eventually this would force publishers to lower their wholesale prices to reflect the much lower cost of producing and distributing digital media compared to physical books.
So he was using Amazon's massive capital, its war chest again.
Right. To unilaterally rewrite the economic rules of the entire publishing industry. It's a classic Titan move. You sacrifice immediate profit to gain long-term systemic control over the market.
That willingness to take huge risks, bordering on reckless as the source says, seems to define these modern titans. And we see that maybe even more extremely with Elon Musk.
Oh, absolutely. Musk embodies that willingness bordering on the reckless to take the risks. His decision-making often seems based on these immediate high-stakes calculations that would probably give a traditional CEO nightmares, like that rocket launch story.
The cracked engine skirt.
Yeah, so just before planned launch, the team finds two small cracks, but they're significant, in the rocket engine skirt. Standard procedure is crystal clear. You stand down, you investigate, you fix it.
But standing down doesn't really fit the hardcore culture he cultivates, does it? So what did he do?
His immediate thought process was, apparently, okay, how much thrust will we lose if we just remove the damaged part? He did a quick calculation and decided the loss was acceptable. His order, according to the source, literally cut the skirt off with a big pair of shears. Cut it off. Just cut it off. The rocket launched the next day, successfully. Now, it worked, but it shows this unwavering focus on speed, on mission completion, prioritizing the immediate goal over conventional engineering caution, over established process. And that kind of decision-making, it breeds this fanatic work culture where risk is something to be instantly assessed and often just pushed through.
And that fanaticism, that hardcore culture, that was clearly central to his thinking when he bought Twitter, wasn't it? It wasn't just about the money. It was about imposing a new cultural mandate through massive cuts.
That's exactly right. When he took over Twitter, he pushed for incredibly deep cuts, aiming for up to 90% of employees gone. Now, it was framed partly as a financial necessity, sure, but the sources confirmed there was this crucial secondary goal to deliberately foster a hardcore fanatic work culture.
Get rid of anyone not fully committed.
Essentially, people assigned to actually implement these huge cuts, they apparently faced a lot of internal pushback, arguments that the platform would literally collapse. And their standard reply, reportedly, was just an appeal to the ultimate authority. Elon has asked for this, and this is how he operates. The company culture had to become a direct reflection of his own relentless pace and demands.
And this intense competitive drive, it even spills over into personal rivalries, doesn't it? It shows how much ego can fuel these things. His comments about Jeff Bezos are pretty revealing.
Oh, it's a fascinating dynamic. Musk publicly criticized Bezos, especially for his, quote, lavish multi-mansion lifestyle. But what's really telling is Musk admitting why he did it. He said he was intentionally trying to goad him into spending more time at Blue Origin so they make more progress.
Wow, so he's trying to manipulate his rival's focus.
Yeah. It's not just about building better rockets. It's this ego-driven game where he wants to dominate his main competitor by influencing how Bezos spends his time and energy. Success isn't just hitting orbit. It's being seen as winning against the other titans.
Okay, so if Bezos and Musk channel that kind of authoritarian drive into disruptive tech and engineering,
Yeah.
Adam Neumann at WeWork, he seems to have taken that founder-centric ego and applied it almost purely to hitting the biggest possible valuation number, sometimes seemingly detached from reality.
Yeah.
The sources talk about the sheer scale of his ambition. It was grandiose.
Oh, beyond grandiose. His ambitions weren't just about running a successful company. They were practically geopolitical. He apparently told executives flat out it wasn't enough to run the world's biggest business. He needed the world's biggest valuation.
Why? What was the justification for that?
So that, and this is a direct quote according to the source, when countries started shooting at one another, he'd be the one they'd have to call to solve their problems.
Seriously? He thought WeWork's valuation would make him a global peacemaker.
That seems to be the implication. It's just a staggering level of, well, messianic self-belief. Blending corporate goals with this ultimate desire for global power and influence, all tied to the stock price.
The danger, though, with operating at that level of self-confidence is you start ignoring warnings, right? Especially about things like governance or basic business fundamentals. The sources say he just shrugged off advice about those weird, founder-friendly governance rules.
Yeah. Advisors specifically warned him that those provisions, which gave him vastly disproportionate voting power even after an IPO, could knock WeWork's valuation down by as much as 30%.
30%.
In his reaction. Reportedly, he just dismissed it, said it would just be a temporary dip in enthusiasm or something. It really highlights that core corporate authoritarianism. The founder's personal desire for absolute control overrides even the most stark financial warnings about how the market might react.
And nothing shows that detachment from basic economics better than the metrics they didn't include in the IPO documents.
That omission is incredibly telling. For a company whose entire business is leasing and then subleasing office space, the single most important metric in that industry is the profit margin of mature locations.
Meaning, once a WeWork space has been open a while and is mostly full, is it actually making money?
Exactly. It tells you if the basic unit economics of the business model actually work. Do they make profit on a typical location once it's up and running? The fact that that number was nowhere to be found in the official IPO prospectus.
even though it's standard for the industry.
Completely standard. It shows a deliberate choice to keep investors focused purely on the exciting growth story, the narrative, the potential, and not on whether the underlying business was actually profitable or sustainable. The ultimate control they wanted, maybe, was control over perception in the financial markets. Keep the hype going, ignore the fundamentals. Looking across all these examples, historical and modern, there's this recurring theme, isn't there? As the fortune gets bigger, the need to build protective mechanisms around it seems to grow just as fast.
Yeah, like building a bigger moat.
Exactly. And that moat is often built using complexity, using opacity, and using political influence. Which brings us pretty directly to the Koch network. They provide a sort of modern masterclass in how to institutionalize that protection through, dark money and highly organized political action.
Right. They didn't just get incredibly wealthy. They simultaneously built, as the source puts it, an ideological assembly line justifying that wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, a powerful political machine to protect it.
And that machine, it was really designed for two main things. Influence, obviously, but also obfuscation. Hiding the strings. They created this coalition, something like 17 allied conservative groups.
17. Wow.
Yeah. And that structure wasn't an accident. It was deliberately set up to, quote, mask their centralized source of funding. So by funding all these different groups, each targeting a specific niche audience like the Libre Initiative for Latino voters or Concerned Women for America for conservative women.
They make it look like lots of separate grassroots movements.
Precisely. It creates this appearance of a diverse, broad-based coalition, making it exponentially harder for the public, for journalists, for regulators to track where all the money is ultimately coming from. This source remains centralized, but the distribution network is designed to hide that fact.
And this method, this kind of opaque political spending, it didn't just appear overnight. It exploded in a really short period.
The numbers are just staggering. The sources track this incredible rise in political spending by these social welfare groups. Yeah. 501c4s, the ones that don't have to disclose their donors. Dark money, basically. Between 2006 and 2010, just 4 years.
Yeah.
The percentage of total political spending coming from these hidden donor groups apparently went from just 2%.
2% in 4 years.
40%, effectively hiding the origins of hundreds of millions of dollars flooding into the political system.
That's a fundamental shift in the transparency of American politics. Right there, in less than half a decade.
It absolutely is. And as one legal expert quoted in the sources pointed out, the people running the groups, the politicians benefiting, they know where the money is coming from. The only ones in the dark, he said, will be American voters. So this shift, it basically institutionalized a way to project enormous political power without any real public accountability. It ensured that the machine built to protect the fortune could operate very effectively from the shadows, pushing for policies they favored, fighting against regulations they didn't.
Okay, shifting back in time again, Howard Hughes. He used a totally different kind of secrecy and complexity, didn't he? Much more personal, almost psychological, built around this absolute control of his immediate world.
Oh, Hughes was the ultimate obsessive controller. His whole world, how he managed it, was almost pathological. It relied on these incredibly meticulous systems of documentation, things called the master reminder list, the special reminder list, these locate books.
Locate books, what were those?
They were used to keep track of all his contacts, but everyone had a code name. Like the actress Jean Peters, she was apparently codenamed Major Bertrandez.
Major Bertrandez.
Okay. It was this ultimate personalized system for managing a complex web of business and personal interests, built entirely on the premise that nobody could be trusted. Absolute control was the only security.
And his use of charitable structures, that was incredibly complex too.
Yeah.
But it seemed designed less for actual charity and more for, managing his fortune and avoiding taxes. The sources call it an ingenious lease and sublease arrangement.
Yeah, that scheme is a real masterclass in financial engineering, specifically designed to work around the tax code. It involved three main parts. The Hughes Tool Company, which was hugely profitable.
Right.
The Hughes Aircraft Company, also very profitable, especially with government contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Hughes Medical Institute. Now, the institute was officially sanctioned as a tax-exempt charitable organization. That's the key.
Okay, so how did the ingenious arrangement actually work? Break it down for us.
Okay, so step one. The Medical Institute, the charity, it actually received almost no direct funding from the very profitable aircraft company. That seems weird, right?
Yeah, you'd think the profits would flow to the charity.
Instead, step two. The Medical Institute lease land and buildings from the Hughes Tool Company.
Okay.
Step 3. The Institute then immediately subleased that exact same property back to the Hughes Aircraft Company, but for more money than it was paying in rent.
Hold on. So the charity rents from one Hughes company, then rents it back to another Hughes company at a profit.
Exactly. It created this perfect little circular flow that acted as a massive tax shield and income generator for Hughes himself.
How did Hughes personally benefit? Where did the cash end up?
Well, through this setup, the Medical Institute ended up paying Howard Hughes personally $22.9 million just in interest and lease payments between 1953 and 1967.
Wow. So the charity was basically paying him millions.
Effectively, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It generated huge personal income for him, all while using the tax-exempt status of the Medical Institute as the pivot point. And here's the kicker. The aircraft company, remember they were a major government contractor. They apparently just tacked those sublease payments onto their government contracts as a cost of doing business.
You're kidding. So taxpayers were indirectly funding Hughes's personal income scheme.
That seems to be the implication. It's just a perfect example of leveraging complex regulatory structures, the tax code, government contracting rules for concentrated personal control and profit protection. Absolutely ingenious in a ruthless sort of way.
That kind of historical complexity, using legal structures in finance, it definitely finds a modern echo in the world of high finance, M&A, the buyout wars of the 1980s especially. That whole world relies on incredibly complex financial structuring, not physical assets like railroads.
Oh, absolutely. And the buyout industry itself, it went through this fundamental change after the crazy leverage of the 1980s. Lenders got much more cautious. Before, these corporate raiders, they might only have had to put up, say, 5 or 10% of the deal value in actual equity, their own money.
The rest was all borrowed debt.
All borrowed debt. But after some high-profile deals went sour, lenders started demanding way more skin in the game from the buyers. The equity requirement jumped hugely, up to 20 or even 30%.
Why did that shift happen? Just burned fingers. And how did it change the way these financial titans operated?
It was definitely burned fingers, yeah. Lenders realized the immense risk they were taking with that much leverage. By forcing the buyers, the private equity firms, the new titans, to put up significantly more of their own capital, they shared the risk more equitably.
So it sidelined the pure debt cowboys.
It kind of did. It pushed aside the old style of raider who relied almost solely on debt arbitrage, and it ushered in this new mantra, value creation. The new generation of private equity players, they had to actually get involved in the operations of the companies they bought.
They had to make the business better.
They had to find ways to genuinely improve efficiency, cut costs, generate more cash flow to justify the acquisition price, and pay down the still significant debt. They couldn't just rely on financial tricks anymore. The focus shifted, at least somewhat, from pure financial maneuvering to operational control and improvement.
But, okay, whether the deal was funded with 5% equity or 30%, the human cost for the people working at these companies, that often got lost in the shuffle, right? Far removed from the Wall Street deal rooms. The RJR Nabisco battle is like the classic example of this.
It really is. The source highlights the story of one executive there, a guy named Greenius. He wasn't part of the initial management buyout group. When he finally learned the details of the KKR plan that eventually won, he realized what it meant.
What?
He realized that the Nabisco side of the business, his side, was going to be broken up and sold off almost immediately to help pay down the mountain of debt created by the buyout itself. The realization wasn't just some abstract financial point. It was intensely personal.
He saw his own division being sacrificed.
Yeah. The source captures his shock. He's blowing up Nabisco. I'm out of a job. My people are screwed. That's the human reality. These massive, high-stakes financial wars, driven by the Titans' goal of maximizing returns, they inherently involved sacrificing the stability, the structure, and literally thousands of jobs that depended on the companies being targeted. Hashtag tag, 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 outro.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive, it's taken us from, industrial barons leveraging state power and railroads, all the way to modern tech giants leveraging algorithms and Wall Street titans leveraging complex finance. But it really brings us back to one clear, pretty consistent theme, doesn't it?
It really does. The accumulation of immense wealth seems absolutely inseparable from the accumulation and the really zealous guarding of power. Control, whether that's controlling the actual means of production like Carnegie and Rockefeller did, or controlling the political narrative through these complex hidden funding networks like the Cox, or controlling the very definition of risk and corporate culture itself like a Musk or a Bezos. It seems immense wealth always demands immense centralized control.
And the systems they build to maintain that control.
Often opaque, right. Often leveraging those political connections or exploiting legal loopholes. They're fundamentally designed to protect and amplify the singular will of the titan. And in doing so, they're constantly pushing against, constantly challenging the established rules and norms of society and business.
So the defining thing about these fortunes is not just the sheer amount of money. It's the force they represent, that gravitational pull the sources mentioned. It allows these individuals to basically tear down old structures and rebuild commercial or social norms in whatever image they prefer.
Yeah.
They don't just play by the rules. They often end up rewriting the rule book itself.
Which leaves us with a really interesting, maybe provocative final thought for you, the listener, to consider long after we finish here. If all these stories, all these deep dives, show that concentrated wealth almost instinctively seeks to hold on to power, to give away as little control as possible, even when they're giving away billions in philanthropy, what does it actually mean? What truly happens when a titan intentionally tries to use their fortune not just to donate money, but to actively dismantle the traditional power structures they inherited? Can that even work? And what are the real systemic consequences if someone tries that kind of radical disruption?
Can accumulated power ever genuinely let go of control?
That's the ultimate tension, isn't it? Something to think about.